In this third screencast for Chapter 2, we'll start our discussion of organic molecules. Organic molecules make up much of the bodies of living organisms. I'll give you a moment to read this quote. I'm not sure if organic chemistry has improved or not since Wohler's time. We certainly know more about organic chemistry today. To understand how the bodies of organisms function, we have to have some knowledge of organic chemistry. My goal is to show you some of the remarkable things without losing you in the jungle. So, what is an organic molecule? In the 1800s, chemists knew little about synthesizing organic molecules. They acquired them from other living organisms. That early definition of organic molecules is no longer useful today because we can synthesize many in the lab. We're going to define organic molecules as those molecules which must contain the elements carbon and hydrogen. Other elements can be present, but both carbon and hydrogen must be. I would like for you to be able to recognize 4 different families of organic molecules. To do this, I think it helps to start with functional groups. These are subunits. These are pieces of organic molecules. By recognizing these 5 functional groups and remembering the combinations found in various organic molecules, you'll be able to recognize sugars, fats, oils, proteins, and nucleic acids. These stick figures help to illustrate how the various atoms making up the functional groups are arranged. The lines represent chemical bonds between the atoms. A single line represents one bond. 2 lines represents a stronger double bond. A carboxyl group is composed of a carbon atom, 2 oxygens, and a single hydrogen. Carboxyl groups are sometimes called acidic groups since they often release a hydrogen ion when placed in solution. In other words, they act as an acid. Carbon atoms can form 4 bonds with other atoms. The line to the right of the carbon with nothing attached indicates that this carboxyl group can be attached to something else. Methyl groups contain a single carbon atom bonded to 3 hydrogen atoms. Methane, a very simple organic molecule, is composed of a methyl group with a 4th hydrogen attached. Remember, these carbon-hydrogen bonds are nonpolar. Methyl groups are abundant in hydrophobic molecules, like fats and oils. This is a hydroxyl group. It has an oxygen bonded to a hydrogen. The oxygen-hydrogen bonds are polar covalent bonds. These polar bonds result in partial separation of charges, with the oxygen becoming slightly negative and the hydrogen slightly positive. Hydroxyl groups are abundant in molecules which dissolve easily in water, for example, small sugars. Phosphorus and 3 oxygen atoms make up a phosphate group. Among other molecules, phosphate groups are abundant in nucleic acids, for example, DNA. Amino groups are unique in that they contain the element nitrogen. Amino groups are abundant in proteins. Proteins are made of long chains of small organic molecules called amino acids. In addition to amino groups, can you guess what other functional group is found in amino acids? Sure, it's the acidic carboxyl group. They are not the only organic molecules found in living organisms, but 4 very important groups are the carbohydrates, also commonly called sugars, lipids, which are fats and oils, proteins, which are a very diverse group of molecules, and nucleic acids, for example, DNA. Carbohydrates contain only the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Carbon atoms are bonded together to form the backbone of the molecules, with lots of hydroxyl groups attached to the carbons. Carbohydrates are divided into 3 types: monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Monosaccharides are generally smaller molecules, often called simple sugars. Disaccharides are made from 2 simple sugars. The largest sugars are polysaccharides. They're polymers of simple sugars. Polymers are potentially huge molecules made of multiple smaller components linked together, much like the cars making up a railroad train. The cars, the smaller repeating subunits, are called monomers. Polysaccharides are polymers made of many simple sugars bonded together. Proteins are polymers of potentially hundreds or thousands of amino acids. DNA is a ladder-like polymer made up of nucleotides. Plastics are polymers commonly made from hydrocarbons, like those found in petroleum. Back to carbohydrates. Remember, all carbohydrates that we'll discuss contain only the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. In simple sugars, these three elements are present in a ratio of 1 carbon to 2 hydrogens to 1 oxygen. For example, glucose, a very common simple sugar, has 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygen atoms. Another characteristic to look for in monosaccharides is lots of hydroxyl groups. Why do these simple sugars dissolve readily in water? I'll ask you that question again in class. You've been warned. The prefix di means two. Disaccharides are composed of 2 simple sugars. Table sugar, also called sucrose, is an example of a disaccharide. Like simple sugars, disaccharides are made of only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But the ratio of these elements is not exactly 1 to 2 to 1. Let's look at why that ratio isn't 1 carbon to 2 hydrogens to 1 oxygen in disaccharides. When 2 simple sugars are joined together, the reaction that occurs is called condensation synthesis. Synthesis refers to the fact that we're making a larger molecule from 2 smaller subunits. Condensation refers to the release of a water molecule as the disaccharide is formed. A hydroxyl group is broken off one of the simple sugars, a hydrogen is released from the second simple sugar, and a new chemical bond is formed between these 2 simple sugars. Condensation synthesis is also sometimes called dehydration, again referring to the release of a water molecule. In organic chemistry, most reactions are reversible. They can proceed in the opposite direction. The opposite of condensation synthesis is hydrolysis. Hydro refers to water, and lysis means to split. Disaccharides can be split into 2 by inserting a molecule of water. Again, this reaction is called hydrolysis. Polysaccharides are the largest of the carbohydrates. Like other sugars, they contain only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. As the molecule gets larger and larger, the ratio of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen gets further and further away from that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio found in simple sugars. While polysaccharides have lots of polar hydroxyl groups, the large size of the polysaccharides can reduce their ability to dissolve in water. Starch, glycogen, and cellulose are examples of polysaccharides. They're similar and they're all made from nothing but long chains of glucose. Even though they're similar in composition, starch, glycogen, and cellulose are very different molecules. Let's compare starch and cellulose. Starch is good food. Think potatoes, bread. It's easily digested and provides lots of energy. In starch, each glucose monomer is arranged in the same orientation. In this illustration, the orange hexagons represent the glucose monomers. Notice that the oxygen atom in each molecule is located in the upper right corner. This structure represents cellulose. As in the previous slide, the hexagons represent glucose molecules. Notice how every other glucose is flipped over. This seemingly small change alters the shape and the chemistry of the molecule. Cellulose cannot be digested by most organisms. Cellulose is an important component of dietary fiber. Since fiber can't be digested, it passes through our bodies and helps us stay regular. Ready for a break? Let's stop here for now. In the 4th and final screencast for Chapter 2, we'll look at lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids.